Tinian Island, Northern Mariana Islands, August 17, 1944. The sky is heavy with humidity and tension. 18 B-29. Superfortresses are preparing for a daylight strike against the Nakajima aircraft factory in Tokyo, a mission that will require 13 hours of continuous flight across the largest ocean on Earth. These aren't just airplanes. They're billion-dollar promises. Each one costs $640,000, more than 4 Liberty ships, more than a squadron of P-51 Mustangs. They represent the culmination of American industrial might. Pressurized cabins, remote-controlled gun turrets, and 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines capable of generating 2,200 horsepower each. On paper, they're invincible. In reality, they're flying coffins. 73 minutes into the mission, the number 4 engine on a B-29 named Destiny's Tot begins to overheat. The cylinder head temperature gauge climbs past 280 degrees Celsius. The flight engineer frantically adjusts the cowl flaps, richens the fuel mixture, and reduces manifold pressure. Nothing works. At 293 degrees, the magnesium crankcase ignites. Fire spreads through the nacelle faster than the crew can activate the extinguisher system. The aircraft commander orders bailout. Of the 11 men aboard, 6 make it out before the wing separates and the bomber corkscrews into the Pacific. 5 parachutes, 6 coffins, $1 billion investment transformed into smoke and salt water. This isn't an isolated incident. In the first 4 months of B-29 operations, the United States Army Air Forces loses more superfortresses to engine fires than to Japanese fighters and anti-aircraft fire combined. The statistics are apocalyptic. For every 100 B-29s that take off, 14 suffer catastrophic engine failure. Of those 14, 9 result in total loss of aircraft. The average lifespan of a B-29 in combat operations is 26 missions. Crews begin calling the Wright R-3350 the wrong engine. They joke bitterly that the aircraft has 3 turning and 1 burning, except it isn't a joke when your friends are dying. By September 1944, the entire strategic bombing campaign against Japan teeters on the edge of collapse. The 20th Air Force has lost 72 B-29s to engine failures, representing an investment of $46 million, 800 trained airmen, and America's reputation as the arsenal of democracy. If the engine problem isn't solved within 60 days, General Henry Hap Arnold will be forced to ground the entire B-29 fleet and inform President Roosevelt that the United States cannot bomb Japan into submission before a ground invasion becomes necessary. That ground invasion, Operation Downfall, is projected to cost 1 million American casualties. The mathematics are merciless. Fix the engine or sacrifice a generation. And right now, nobody knows how to fix it. Wright Aeronautical Corporation has thrown everything at the problem. 37 senior engineers with degrees from MIT, Caltech, and the University of Michigan have spent 16 months and $4 million attempting to stabilize the R-3350's operating temperature. They've redesigned the cylinder baffling system 4 times. They've experimented with magnesium-aluminum alloy compositions, modified the fuel injection nozzles, and tested 17 different variations of exhaust valve materials. Every modification either reduces horsepower below acceptable thresholds or fails to prevent thermal runaway under combat loads. The physics seem insurmountable. The core problem is thermodynamic brutality. The R-3350 is an 18-cylinder, twin-row radial engine designed to produce 2,200 horsepower from 2,200 cubic inches of displacement. That's 1 horsepower per cubic inch, an engineering achievement unprecedented in aviation history. But this power density generates heat loads that exceed the capacity of conventional air cooling systems. During climb-out at maximum gross weight, 140,000 pounds, the rear cylinders in each row operate in the thermal shadow of the front cylinders. Airflow across the rear cylinder heads measures only 42% of the flow across the front cylinders. Consequently, rear cylinder head temperatures reach 315 degrees Celsius, while front cylinders run at 260 degrees, a 55-degree differential that creates uneven thermal expansion, warped cylinder barrels, and compression seal failures. The engineers understand the problem perfectly. What they cannot solve is the geometric impossibility. Increasing airflow to the rear cylinders requires wider baffle spacing, which reduces cooling efficiency for the front cylinders. Reducing engine power output solves the thermal problem, but makes the B-29 too heavy to reach bombing altitude with a full payload. Installing liquid cooling systems adds 2,000 pounds of weight and reduces range by 400 miles, rendering the aircraft incapable of reaching Tokyo from Tinian. Every solution creates a new problem. The engineers begin to whisper that the R-3350 is a fundamental design failure, that America has built a bomber too ambitious for the laws of thermodynamics. In a classified meeting at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, on October 3, 1944, Brigadier General Franklin O. Carroll convenes the Engine Crisis Review Board. 17 senior officers, 12 civilian engineers, and 4 representatives from Wright Aeronautical sit in a windowless briefing room reviewing failure data. The conclusions are devastating. Dr. Samuel Herron, the most respected aero engine designer in America, delivers the final assessment. Gentlemen, we are attempting to extract power levels that exceed the thermal conductivity limits of aluminum alloy at operational altitudes. The R-3350 cannot be made safe without a fundamental redesign requiring 18 to 24 months of development and retooling. I recommend we halt B-29 production and accelerate development of the Pratt & Whitney R-4360 as a replacement power plant for 1946 deployment. General Carroll's response is ice cold. Dr. Herron, we don't have 18 months. We don't have 18 weeks. The invasion of Okinawa begins in April. If we cannot destroy Japanese aircraft production before then, our boys will face 4,000 kamikaze aircraft with full fuel and ordnance. Your recommendation is noted and rejected. If Wright Aeronautical cannot solve this problem, I will find someone who can. But General Carroll's defiance is empty. There is nobody left to ask. Every aeronautical engineer in America has reviewed the data. The conclusion is unanimous. The B-29's engine problem cannot be fixed with wartime resources. The laws of physics have spoken. America must accept failure or sacrifice its aircrews and aircraft that burn faster than they bomb. The experts have declared defeat, but they forgot to ask the mechanics. Technical Sergeant Curtis P. LeMay, no relation to the general, is not an engineer. He's a 34-year-old farm equipment mechanic from Moline, Illinois, who enlisted in the Army Air Corps in 1942 after the tractor factory where he worked converted to building aircraft engine components. His formal education ended after 10th grade when his father died, and Curtis had to support his mother and 3 younger sisters. He learned engineering the way most Americans did in the Depression, by fixing broken things with whatever materials were available. Before the war, he could rebuild a John Deere Model D tractor engine in 4 hours using hand tools and salvaged parts. Now, he's a line chief responsible for maintaining 12 B-29’s at North Field, Tinian, and he's watching men die because of a problem that, to him, seems incredibly familiar. Curtis first notices the pattern on September 22, 1944, while supervising an engine change on a B-29 that returned with fire damage to the number 3 nacelle. The Wright R-3350 is mounted on a dolly, awaiting transport to the salvage depot. Curtis kneels beside the scorched engine and runs his hand along the cylinder cooling fins. The rear cylinders, numbers 10 through 18, are discolored dark blue and gray, indicating sustained temperatures above 300 degrees Celsius. The front cylinders, numbers 1 through 9, show minimal heat stress. Curtis has seen this exact pattern before, but not in an aircraft engine. He saw it in overheating tractor engines during wheat harvest season in Illinois. In the Midwest, farmers push their tractors to maximum load during harvest, 16-hour days pulling threshers through August heat. The Continental and John Deere engines would overheat because grasshoppers, chaff, and dust clogged the radiator screens and cooling fins. The solution wasn't more airflow. It was redirecting the airflow that already existed. Curtis remembers modifying a neighbor's tractor by installing simple sheet metal deflectors that channeled air from the front of the radiator to the hotter rear sections. It dropped operating temperature by 30 degrees and cost 12 cents in hardware store metal. Curtis stares at the B-29 engine cowling. The design is sophisticated. Spring-loaded cowl flaps that open and close based on temperature sensors, carefully calculated baffle spacing, precision-machined aluminum deflectors. It's beautiful engineering. It's also completely wrong. The baffles are designed to distribute air evenly across all 18 cylinders, but even distribution doesn't account for the thermal shadow effect. The rear cylinders don't need equal air, they need more air. The front cylinders are already cool enough. The system is optimized for a problem that doesn't exist. Curtis pulls out a pocket notebook and sketches his idea. What if the baffles weren't evenly spaced? What if the front cylinder baffles were deliberately narrowed to reduce airflow, and that saved air was redirected to the rear cylinders using simple curved deflectors? The total airflow through the cowling wouldn't change. The engine would breathe the same volume of air, but the distribution would be asymmetric, matching the asymmetric heat load. It violates every principle of balanced aerodynamic design. It's exactly the kind of redneck engineering that would make a Caltech graduate laugh. But Curtis knows it will work because he's already done it on a tractor engine generating 70 horsepower. And if it works at 70 horsepower, why wouldn't it work at 2200? He takes his sketch to his commanding officer, Captain Richard Delmonico, a former high school physics teacher from Pennsylvania. Curtis explains his theory using tractor analogies. Captain Delmonico listens, asks 3 questions about airflow velocity and pressure differentials, and then says the words that will change history. Curtis, if you're wrong, I'll be court-martialed for destruction of government property. If you're right, you'll save 1,000 lives. Build it. They choose a war-weary B-29 designated for salvage, a bomber that suffered flak damage over Nagasaki and is awaiting cannibalization for spare parts. For 3 nights, Curtis and a hand-picked crew of 5 mechanics work in secret between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., when flight operations are suspended and the flight line is dark. They have no authorization, no engineering drawings, and no official materials requisition. What they do have is a cutting torch, a sheet metal brake, 20 pounds of scrap aluminum from a damaged P-51 Mustang drop tank, and the absolute certainty that doing nothing means watching more crews burn. Curtis fabricates the modified baffles using measurements taken directly from the salvaged R-3350. He narrows the baffle spacing around cylinders 1 through 9 by 11 millimeters, reducing the cooling air gap from 43 millimeters to 32 millimeters. He calculates, using nothing but a slide rule and high school algebra, that this reduction will decrease airflow to the front cylinders by approximately 18%. Then he bends 6 curved deflector plates from the P-51 drop tank aluminum, each measuring 19 centimeters long and 12 centimeters wide, and rivets them to the rear baffle assembly. These deflectors are angled at 23 degrees to channel the air saved from the front cylinders directly onto the rear cylinder heads. The entire modification adds 4 pounds of weight and costs the U.S. government nothing except the career of Captain Delmonico if it fails. On October 8, 1944, at 0530 hours, they conduct the unauthorized test. Captain Delmonico sits in the pilot's seat. Curtis rides in the flight engineer station, watching the cylinder head temperature gauges with the intensity of a surgeon monitoring a patient's heartbeat. They start all 4 engines and taxi to the end of the runway. No flight plan has been filed. No tower clearance has been requested. If anyone asks, they're conducting a high-power engine run-up for maintenance diagnostics. What they're actually doing is committing a court-martial offense. Captain Delmonico advances the throttles to maximum power, 55 inches of manifold pressure, 2,700 RPM. The 4 R-3350's roar. The aircraft strains against the brakes. Curtis watches the gauges. Cylinder head temperatures climb, 240 degrees, 260 degrees, 270 degrees. On a standard B-29, the rear cylinders would be approaching critical temperature by now, but Curtis's gauges show something impossible. The front cylinders stabilize at 261 degrees. The rear cylinders stabilize at 268 degrees. 7 degrees of differential. 7 degrees instead of 55. The temperatures hold steady for 4 minutes, then 5, then 10. Captain Delmonico slowly advances the throttles beyond rated power. 60 inches of manifold pressure, a setting normally prohibited except in emergency combat situations. The rear cylinders climb to 279 degrees and stop. They stop. They don't climb into thermal runaway. They don't ignite. They just run, smooth and cool, generating 2,300 horsepower per engine, as if this is the most natural thing in the world. Curtis exhales for the first time in 10 minutes. He's just solved a $4 million engineering crisis with 20 pounds of scrap aluminum and a memory of fixing tractors in Illinois. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. October 18, 1944. Captain Delmonico stands before the Engine Crisis Review Board, holding Curtis's hand-fabricated baffle assembly like a medieval peasant presenting a holy relic to skeptical bishops. The room is filled with men who possess 63 engineering degrees among them. Captain Delmonico has a bachelor's degree in education. Curtis, who is not permitted to attend because sergeants do not address general officers, has a 10th grade education and hands scarred by 20 years of wrench work. General Carroll examines the modification with the expression of a man being shown a perpetual motion machine. Captain, explain to me how this asymmetric baffle arrangement solves a problem that Wright Aeronautical's entire engineering department has declared unsolvable. Captain Delmonico clears his throat. Sir, the issue isn't total airflow, it's airflow distribution. The front cylinders don't need as much cooling because they're not as hot. By reducing their airflow and redirecting that air to the rear cylinders, we eliminate the thermal differential without changing the engine's total air consumption. My flight engineer, Technical Sergeant LeMay, calculated the modification using pressure flow equations and tested it on a salvaged aircraft. We achieved a 48-degree reduction in peak rear cylinder temperature and a 7-degree overall differential across all 18 cylinders. Dr. Samuel Herron leans forward. His voice carries the patient condescension of a professor correcting an undergraduate. Captain, asymmetric cooling violates fundamental principles of radial engine design. Uneven airflow creates turbulence, reduces volumetric efficiency, and risks compressor stall in the supercharger intake. Your modification might work on the ground, but at 28,000 feet in combat conditions, it will fail catastrophically. You're describing a mechanism that cannot function according to established thermodynamic models. Captain Delmonico meets his gaze. Dr. Heron, with respect, it already has functioned. We ran it at 60 inches of manifold pressure for 17 minutes. Rear cylinder temps never exceeded 280 degrees. I have the flight engineer's log data. The room erupts in objections. Uncontrolled testing. Violation of experimental protocols. Destruction of government property. General Carroll raises his hand for silence. Captain, what you've described is grounds for court-martial. You operated an aircraft with unauthorized modifications, endangered an airframe worth $640,000, and violated approximately 14 separate Army Air Forces regulations. He pauses. The room is silent. You also may have saved this entire goddamn program. General Carroll turns to the assembled engineers. Gentlemen, I don't care if this modification violates every thermodynamic principle ever published. If it works, we're installing it on every B-29 in the Pacific. Dr. Heron, you will personally supervise flight testing of Captain Delmonico's baffles on 3 aircraft under full combat load conditions. You have 72 hours. If the results match the captain's data, we begin immediate production. Are we clear? Dr. Heron's jaw tightens. General, I cannot endorse a modification that contradicts established engineering science. General Carroll's response is a whisper that cuts like a blade. Then I'll find someone who can. Dismissed. Tokyo, Japan, November 24th, 1944. At 13,000 meters, 111 B-29 Superfortresses approach the Japanese mainland in the largest daylight raid since the bombing campaign began. Every aircraft is equipped with Curtiss's modified baffle system, now officially designated the LeMay Asymmetric Cooling Modification, a name that embarrasses Curtiss so much he refuses to discuss it. Japanese radar stations track the incoming formation and scramble 216 fighters from 5 air bases. The Japanese pilots expect what they've seen in every previous B-29 raid. American bombers struggling with engine failures, aircraft dropping out of formation trailing smoke, easy kills for experienced interceptors. What happens instead is impossible. The B-29s maintain formation at 9,000 meters, 3,000 meters higher than any previous raid. Their engines run smooth and cool, generating full combat power without overheating. When Japanese Ki-61 fighters climb to intercept, the B-29s simply climb higher. Their Wright R-3350s breathing thin air at altitudes the Japanese fighters cannot sustain. The Superfortresses level off at 9,700 meters and begin their bomb run. At this altitude, Japanese anti-aircraft fire is ineffective. The shells detonate 400 meters below the formation. The bombers are untouchable. Lieutenant Colonel Takeshi Nakamura, commanding the 244th Fighter Sentai, radios his pilots in disbelief. They are at 10,000 meters. How are they at 10,000 meters? His Ki-84 fighter, one of the fastest in the Japanese arsenal, can barely maintain 9,500 meters. His engine is screaming, starved for oxygen, while the American bombers cruise effortlessly above him. He watches helplessly as the B-29s release their payloads onto the Nakajima Musashino aircraft factory, the same target they've failed to hit in 3 previous raids. This time, 70% of the bombs impact within the target area. The factory disappears beneath a curtain of explosions. Of the 111 B-29s that enter Japanese airspace, 109 return to base. 0 aircraft are lost to engine failure. 0. The 2 losses are attributed to fighter attacks and anti-aircraft fire. Acceptable combat losses. The mission planners are stunned. The statistical analysts recheck their calculations 3 times because the numbers seem impossible. Before Curtis's modification, average B-29 losses per mission, 12%, with 9% attributed to engine failure. After Curtis's modification, 1.8% total losses, 0% engine failure. The Japanese High Command receives the mission reports with growing horror. If the Americans can now bomb from altitudes where Japanese fighters cannot intercept, the entire air defense strategy is obsolete. Within 2 weeks, Japanese fighter tactics shift from high-altitude interception to desperate low-altitude ramming attacks. Kamikaze missions born from the realization that conventional fighter defense is now impossible. Curtis's scraps of aluminum and farm boy engineering have rendered Japan's airspace indefensible, a problem that America's best engineers called scientifically impossible has been solved by a mechanic who learned thermodynamics by fixing overheating tractors. The war hasn't ended, but its outcome is no longer in doubt. Curtis LeMay, the sergeant, not the general, musters out of the Army Air Forces in November 1945 with an honorable discharge, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and a Legion of Merit medal that he keeps in a drawer and never shows anyone. He returns to Moline, Illinois, and opens a small engine repair shop on 4th Avenue, 3 blocks from the tractor factory where he used to work. He fixes lawnmowers, refrigerators, and outboard motors. He never mentions the war. When customers ask about his military service, he says he worked on airplanes and changes the subject. In 1953, a reporter from the Moline Dispatch discovers Curtis's service record and writes a feature article titled "Local Mechanics' Wartime Invention Saved Thousands." Curtis refuses to be interviewed. He tells the reporter, "I didn't invent anything. I just moved some metal around until it made sense. Any decent mechanic would have done the same thing." The article runs without his cooperation. He never reads it. Curtis dies in 1977 at age 67 from emphysema, a consequence of breathing too much aircraft exhaust on Tinian. 14 people attend his funeral. None of them know that the asymmetric baffle cooling system he designed in 3 midnight shifts is still standard engineering in radial engine aircraft worldwide. The Pratt & Whitney R-3350, the Wright R-1820, and every major radial engine developed after 1945 incorporates asymmetric cooling principles derived directly from Curtis's modification. Modern turbine engines use similar asymmetric airflow distribution in their cooling systems. The principle Curtis discovered while thinking about overheating tractors is now taught in graduate-level aerospace engineering courses as differential thermal load management. Innovation doesn't come from credentials. It comes from observation, from mechanics who see problems with fresh eyes, from farm boys who understand that engineering is just organized common sense. Curtis never had a degree. He had something better. He had a wrench, a problem, and the courage to break the rules when the rules were killing people. That's how wars are won.